Dustin Abernathy sat slumped near the back of Crestwood Academy's science room, his tired eyes glued to a beat-up anatomy chart hanging precariously on the wall. At 16, he was lanky and quiet, his thin frame suggesting a fragility he didn't actually possess. His clothes were usually faded and a little too big, making him look like he was trying to disappear into the crowd. Most students at Crestwood High seemed to ignore him completely, and that suited Dustin just fine. When the buzzer echoed, students began slowly trickling out for the midday meal. Dustin deliberately gathered his things, moving slowly so he wouldn't get caught in the throng. He knew that patience was essential when navigating the crowded halls unnoticed. Linger too long, and he'd be stuck alone with teachers trying to start stilted chats about why he didn't have pals. Leave too soon, and he'd be thrown into the loud social scene that Dustin wanted no part of. "Well, well, look who's still here," a voice called out that made Dustin's shoulders tense up almost unnoticeably. The invisible kid of Crestwood High. Brandon Rutherford stood in the entrance with his usual group of followers. At 17, Brandon was everything Dustin wasn't. Muscular, sure of himself, with a friendly smile that fooled teachers into thinking he was a good kid and other students into wanting his approval. His blonde hair was always perfectly styled, and he wore his football jacket like a badge of honor. Behind him was Ethan Klein, a chubby kid with bright orange hair whose main job seemed to be laughing at anything Brandon said, and Tiffany Stone, whose cruel remarks had broken down more than a few students. Dustin finished closing his book bag and slowly stood up. "Just going to get lunch," he mumbled quietly, his voice steady, even though his heart was racing. "Lunch?" Brandon sauntered into the room, forcing Dustin to either shove past him or stand there. "What do you even eat? I never see you in the food hall." "Maybe he eats by himself in the janitor's closet," Ethan wheezed, getting the laugh he was aiming for. Dustin had been eating his lunch in the art studio for the last couple months, ever since his mom's new job had moved the family to this town. The art teacher, Mr. Evans, pretended not to notice when he ate his sandwich near the pottery wheels, and Dustin was grateful for the quiet understanding. "I eat in the art studio," Dustin said simply. "The art studio?" Tiffany raised her eyebrows. "Wow, you really are a nobody, aren't you?" The words stung, but Dustin had gotten used to thoughtless cruelty over the years. New job locations meant new schools, and being the new kid was a role he knew well. He'd learned that fighting back only made things worse, and besides, there were much worse things than being called names. Much, much worse things. "Excuse me," Dustin said, heading toward the door. Brandon didn't budge. "You know what I think, Abernathy? I think you're hiding something. Nobody's this boring on accident." "If only you knew," Dustin thought. Out loud, he said, "I'm just trying to finish high school like everybody else." "Right," Brandon dragged out the word like he didn't believe it. "Well, maybe we should help you finish it a little faster." The light shove was subtle, just enough to make Dustin stumble back a step. To anyone watching, it might have looked accidental, just Brandon moving past him. But Dustin felt the intent behind it, the testing of limits that would get worse if he didn't respond somehow. Dustin straightened his book bag straps and looked Brandon right in the eye. For just a second, something flashed in his eyes, something that made Brandon blink and take a step back without even realizing it. Then it was gone, replaced by the same quiet look that everyone expected from Dustin Abernathy. "See you," Dustin said, and walked past them into the hallway. The next few weeks turned into a pattern. Brandon and his pals seemed to have decided to make Dustin their target, finding little ways to make things difficult. A bump in the hall here, a drink spilled on his homework there. Nothing big enough to get the attention of a teacher, but constant enough to wear down someone who just wanted to be left alone. Dustin put up with it with the same quiet patience he'd learned from watching his mother deal with problems. Melissa Abernathy was a registered nurse and had taught her son that sometimes the best answer to trouble was no answer at all. Choose your fights, she always said, and when you do, make sure you're fighting for something worth it. The problem was, Dustin wasn't sure anything at Crestwood High was worth fighting for. Things got worse on a Thursday afternoon in early November. Dustin was walking to his last class, history, when Brandon showed up beside him, keeping pace. "Abernathy," Brandon said, acting friendly, "I've been thinking about you." Dustin kept walking, looking straight ahead. "See, I've been trying to figure you out. New kid, keeps to himself, never makes trouble. But something about you just doesn't make sense." They got to the stairs, and Brandon's friends appeared as if on cue. Ethan blocked the stairs, while Tiffany stood in a spot that would stop Dustin from turning around. "I think," Brandon went on, "you're scared of us." Dustin stopped walking. "I'm not scared of you." "Really?" Brandon smiled wider. "Then prove it." The challenge hung in the air between them. Dustin could feel other students beginning to notice, forming a small crowd whenever teen drama was about to happen. He saw people he knew from class, kids who'd never talked to him but were now very interested in what he might do. "I don't have to prove anything," Dustin said. "See, that's where you're wrong." Brandon reached out and knocked Dustin's history book out of his hands. It hit the ground with a loud thud that echoed in the stairwell. "I think you have everything to prove." Dustin looked down at his textbook, then back up at Brandon. The right thing to do would be to pick up the book and walk away. Take the small insult and avoid whatever Brandon was planning. That's what he'd been doing for weeks, and it had worked okay so far. But as Dustin bent down to pick up his book, Brandon put his foot on it. "Leave it," Brandon said. Something changed in Dustin's body language. It was small, a little straighter in his back, a barely noticeable change in how he held his shoulders. But Brandon, who was good at reading weakness in others, saw it right away. "Got a problem, Abernathy?" Dustin looked up from where he was crouched, and for the second time, Brandon saw something in the other boy's eyes that made him uneasy. It was gone quickly, but not before Brandon felt a strange shiver run down his back. "No problem," Dustin said quietly. He waited until Brandon took his foot off, then picked up his textbook and kept going. But something had shifted. The kids who'd stopped to watch whispered to each other as they walked away. Brandon tried to get back his confident attitude, but Ethan and Tiffany both noticed he seemed nervous, and Dustin, walking to history with his book under his arm, felt something inside him that he'd been keeping hidden for months. It felt like his mother's voice, from all the self-defense classes she had made him take when he was younger. "Patience is useful, son, but so is knowing when not to use it." The last straw came 3 days later. Dustin was eating lunch in his usual place near the computers when he heard voices coming toward the studio. Mr. Evans had left for his lunch break, leaving the studio empty, except for Dustin and a few kids working on projects near the front. "I still think he's hiding something," Brandon's voice carried in the quiet room. Dustin set down his sandwich and listened. They were in the main area now, probably looking for him. "Maybe he's just weird," Ethan said. "Some people are just weird." "No, it's more than that." Brandon sounded annoyed. "Did you see the way he looked at me yesterday? Like he wanted to... I don't know. Like he was making a decision." They were getting closer. Dustin thought about what he could do. The studio had a back door that led to the parking lot, but going that way would mean leaving his lunch and his book bag. He could try to wait them out, but they seemed determined to find him. "There he is," Tiffany's voice sounded happy. Dustin looked up to see the three of them turning the corner into his area. Brandon's face was different today, less casually mean and more openly angry. "Eating alone again, Abernathy?" Brandon asked, but he didn't sound friendly at all. Dustin carefully wrapped up his sandwich and put it back in his lunch bag. "Just finishing up." "No, don't leave because of us." Brandon sat down across from Dustin at the small table. "We want to get to know you better." Ethan and Tiffany stood near the table, blocking any easy way out. Dustin noticed that they were standing so that anyone coming into this area would have to walk past them first. "There's not much to know," Dustin said. "I don't think so." Brandon leaned forward. "See, I've been asking around about you. Nobody knows anything about your old school, your family, anything. It's like you just showed up here one day." Dustin didn't say anything. "That's not normal, is it?" Brandon went on. "Most people, when they move, they talk about where they came from. They try to make friends. They join clubs or volunteer. But not you. I'm just focused on school." "That's bullshit." Brandon's voice got louder. "I think you're hiding something, and I think it's time we found out what." Brandon reached across the table and grabbed Dustin's lunch bag. Before Dustin could stop him, Brandon had dumped everything onto the table. A sandwich, an orange, a water bottle, and a small dog tag fell out. "What's this?" Brandon picked up the dog tag before Dustin could grab it. Dustin's heart started beating faster. "Give that back." "Oh, look at this." Brandon held up the tag so Ethan and Tiffany could see. "Is this your mom's, Abernathy?" The dog tag was old and worn, the metal slightly tarnished. "She was in the military," Dustin said quietly, reaching for the dog tag. Brandon pulled it away. "In the military, huh? What? Was she a cook or something?" Dustin's hands tightened into fists under the table. "She was a pilot." "A pilot?" Tiffany asked. "So what, she flew a desk?" "She flew helicopters." Brandon looked at the dog tag more closely. "You know what I think, Abernathy? I think you're trying to be tough like your mom. I think that's why you've got this whole quiet, mysterious act going on. I'm not trying to be anything." "Really?" Brandon stood up quickly, still holding the dog tag. "Then you won't mind if I keep this for a while." Dustin stood up too, and for the first time since they started talking, Brandon remembered why something about Dustin Abernathy made him nervous. Standing up straight, Dustin was taller than Brandon had realized. And there was something about the way he stood, balanced, like he knew how to defend himself. "Give me the dog tag," Dustin said. "Or what?" Brandon challenged. "You'll tell your mommy?" "Oh wait, you can't. She's too busy flying around to take care of her kid." The insult hurt more than any punch could have. Dustin felt years of trying to stay calm begin to break. He thought about his mother, somewhere in Nevada right now, flying dangerous missions. He thought about the phone calls they shared, about the pride in her voice when she talked about Dustin's grades. "Last chance," Dustin said, his voice quiet. Brandon heard the change in his voice and felt that same shiver from the stairs. But he was trapped now, with Ethan and Tiffany watching, with his reputation on the line. "I don't think so," Brandon said, and deliberately threw the dog tag across the room. It clattered against the hard floor. The sound seemed very loud in the quiet studio. Dustin watched the tag bounce across the floor, the only thing he had left of his mom's time in the service, ruined by senseless cruelty. Something broke. Dustin moved faster than Brandon thought possible. 1 second he was standing by the table, the next he had Brandon's arm pinned behind his back, pushing it in a way that made Brandon yell out in pain. "What the hell?" Brandon started to say, but Dustin was already moving again. In one quick move, Dustin swept Brandon's feet out from under him, so Brandon fell hard onto the ground with Dustin standing over him. Ethan started forward, but stopped when Dustin looked at him. The look on Dustin's face was nothing like the quiet boy they'd been picking on for weeks. This was something different, focused, dangerous, completely in charge. "Don't," Dustin said quietly, and Ethan froze. Brandon was gasping, trying to figure out what had just happened. He'd gone from standing to flat on his back in a couple seconds, and he had no idea how. "You want to know what I'm hiding?" Dustin's voice was calm. "My mom didn't just fly helicopters. She taught me how to fight too. Do you know what Krav Maga is?" Brandon shook his head, afraid to speak with Dustin standing over him. "It means she taught me how to protect myself no matter what. How to read people, how to control situations, how to end fights before they start." Dustin leaned closer. The reason I don't fight, Brandon, isn't because I can't. It's because I know exactly what would happen if I did. Tiffany had moved back until she bumped into the pottery wheel. Ethan was frozen, afraid to move. You threw away something that belonged to my mom, Dustin said. A woman who risked her life to protect people like you, people who don't deserve it. Brandon tried to speak, but couldn't get any words out. Here's what's going to happen, Dustin said. You're going to leave me alone, all of you. You're going to stop looking for me, stop talking to me, stop thinking about me, because the next time you decide to mess with me, I won't be as patient as I was today. Dustin let go of Brandon and stood up quickly. Brandon rolled over, coughing and rubbing his arm. And Brandon? Dustin looked down at him. If I ever see you picking on anyone else in this school, anyone at all, you and I are going to have a much longer conversation. Do you understand? Brandon nodded quickly. Dustin picked up the dog tag and walked out of the studio, leaving Brandon, Ethan, and Tiffany speechless. The news spread through Crestwood High like crazy. By the end of the day, everyone knew that quiet Dustin Abernathy had somehow taken down Brandon Rutherford without even trying hard. The details changed depending on who was telling the story. Some said Dustin had used martial arts, others said he'd threatened Brandon, but everyone knew the main facts. Brandon had started something he couldn't finish, and Dustin Abernathy wasn't who they'd thought he was. Brandon didn't say anything about what had happened. He couldn't explain how Dustin had moved so fast, couldn't describe the look in the other boy's eyes without sounding scared. So he stayed quiet and avoided Dustin completely. Ethan and Tiffany did what Brandon did, but they couldn't stop talking about it to other people. In a week, Dustin had a reputation as someone you didn't want to mess with. The way people treated Dustin changed right away. Students who had barely noticed him before now looked him in the eye in the halls. Some even nodded or said hello. Teachers seemed to see him differently too, as if his willingness to stand up for himself had made him more real to them. Dustin cleaned the dog tag and kept it in his pocket. Some things, once broken, can't be made the same again, but they can still be important. 2 weeks after the studio event, Dustin was surprised to see Brandon waiting by his locker after school. Abernathy, Brandon said, sounding unsure. Dustin turned, his face blank. Brandon. I wanted to... Brandon struggled to find the words. What I did, with the tag, that was wrong. Dustin waited. I don't know why I did it. I guess I just... Brandon shook his head. I wanted to see you react. I thought you were weak. I know. Brandon looked at Dustin for a long moment. You really could have hurt me, couldn't you? In the studio. Yes, but you didn't. Dustin adjusted his book bag straps. No, I didn't. Why not? Dustin thought about it. Because hurting you wouldn't have fixed anything. It would have just made me like you. The words stung, but Brandon knew he deserved them. I'm sorry. About your mom. About the tag. About everything. Dustin nodded. Okay. Brandon started to walk away, then turned back. Abernathy, your mom would be proud of you. For how you handled it, I mean. Dustin watched Brandon disappear into the crowd of students going to the parking lot. Then he took out his phone and sent a quick text to his mom. Had a good day at school. Talk to you soon. The reply came back quickly. That's my boy. I'm always proud of you. Dustin smiled and headed home, walking taller than he had in months. He'd learned something important about himself in that art studio. Not just that he could protect himself, but that he could choose how to use that skill. Strength without wisdom was just violence, but strength with control, that was power. And sometimes Dustin realized the most powerful thing you could do was show someone what you could do, then choose not to do it. That lesson, more than any fighting move, was what his mother had really been trying to teach him. 2304 characters.